So this will be the fifth lecture sessions on the TOC or theory of constraints. During these sessions, I will discuss two specific aspects. One is the types of production systems. Already we have referred to, and in the last lecture sessions, in the previous lecture sessions, and you know that there are three types of production systems. These are referred to as a plant. That means either there could be V plant or A plant or T plant. Only in certain cases it may be a combination of all three. But so let us the first. So what we will try to do. That means we will explain that what are the the critical points you need to look into for implementation of TOC approach at a particular type of production system, and then a few typical the questions related to the TOC I am going to discuss, and so that when you appear for the exam, or you may have several queries on a particular topic. So if you go through this the numerical problems, so your understanding will be better. Okay, understanding of the concept and whatever what we want actually. So your learning should be based on say knowledge development, and if you have sufficient knowledge in a particular topic, we will be able to address those problems. Okay, so as I have already pointed out, let me repeat it once again. Under TOC, the production systems are grouped under three categories. Okay, B plant, A plant, and T plant. This term we have been using plant. Okay, not explicitly we are saying the B production systems. We have been using B plant because as we have already pointed out that say your the TOC approach is to be applied at the plant level, and so that's why we have been using this term. Otherwise, it doesn't have any other significance. A V plant has a V-shaped or divergent process flow and has a single or a few raw material and a wide variety of end items. Now you just start thinking of is how many do you have any examples with you? That means can you identify a product or end item production of which requires a V plant? Okay, how many such products you are familiar with? Similarly, alternatively, you can have an A plant. It has an A-shaped or convergent process flow and has many types of raw materials with different routings and a single or a few end items. Now, can you cite few examples of such a production system or few examples of products which must have this sort of plant for their production, A plant? So you just start thinking of, and you must be able to identify a few products which requires A plant. Similarly, you may have a T plant, and this plant has a T-shaped or divergent process flow with limited number of components or sub-assemblies that can be combined into a large number of end items. So is essentially in a suppose assemble to order situation, assemble to order. So up to so what you try to do, you produce the components, and these components are obviously they are usually they are standard size components, and you can use them as per a particular the design. Now these components can be say they used in different combinations, and each combination represent a particular product, okay, or the end item. So if you come across such a situation, obviously you go for establishing a tea plant. For any plant there are interdependent activities, this you cannot avoid. As it is a discrete part manufacturing systems, the flow of materials across the series of interdependent activities may be affected negatively due to three main reasons I have already mentioned. Overactivation of resources. If you go for overactivation of resources, it may so happen that your utilization of the resource may be very poor, and that's why you will be producing, but your as far as throughput generation is concerned, your performance may not be up to the mark. Misallocation of resources, again it may lead to say the blocking, it may lead to say the starving, and similarly if you have misallocation of materials, at a particular stage there could be the blocking or there could be the starving. So these two phenomenon you try to means there must not be at same point in time, or these two conditions you try to avoid. And if you apply the TOC approach, there must not be any say the blocking conditions, or there must not be any say the starving conditions. Okay, so this is to be avoided. That's why the allocation of the resource at a particular so the point in the production system, they are basically the scheduled release points is a very critical issue. Otherwise there could be starving or there could be blocking. Now the next important question is, how do you represent a V plant? So this is the V plant can be presented schematically. So this is a schematic representation. So what you have at the lowest level, you have the inputs, so either one raw material or a few raw materials you use, and then what you do, you start processing them in different ways. So you create this divergent process flow. That means from this point you go to the next point, or you go to the next point. From here again there will be branching, and you move to the third stage like this, and again there will be further branching. You will go to the next stage, and ultimately you reach to the end items. So what you try to do, you have a divergent series, and with this divergent process flow, that means from say one raw material or a few raw materials you can produce. Obviously you have to follow all these the processes, you have to use all these processes at different stages in a systematic manner, but ultimately you can produce a large number of end items. So there are many such say the production systems which fit to this particular say schematic representations, or say this particular say the divergent process flow. So this is referred to as the V plant. Now this plant mainly faces the problem of misallocation of material. So this is very important, in the sense that suppose certain say the material you require at this stage a particular type of material. Now it may so happen that at this stage or at this stage or at any stage of the production systems, you are getting the material, but it's not the right kind of material. So this is one aspect, and the second aspect is, as far as problem is concerned, you need a certain quantity of material at a particular stage of a given type. You are getting that definitely that type of material, but not in the required quantity. Either you are not getting sufficient quantity, or you are getting say the excess quantity. So both are referred to as the misallocation of resources. Okay, so this plant mainly faces the problem of misallocation of material, and this problem you have to solve. Time buffers are placed at CCRs and before shipping. So this is very important in order to maintain the flow of materials within the process. What you need to do, that means the concept of say the time buffer you have to use. That means the time buffers you have to create, and these time buffers are to be placed at certain points only. So what are those the points where you should place the time buffers? One at definitely the CCRs, and the second time buffers you place before shipping the final say the end items. Now, so that to some extent you have come to know what is the characteristics of a V plant, and similarly you also must know what are the say the characteristics of A plant. Now, how do you represent say the A plant? Now, this is also presented schematically. What you have over here, you have the inputs. That means there are a number of inputs, the number of inputs or input raw materials. What you try to do as you proceed, okay, from say the level or the stage 0 to stage 1, the next stage. That means you are you are diverging. That means from one stage you go to the next stage, and from this stage you go to the third stage, and again you combine these the outputs of both the stages are combined. You get at the next stage a combined output, and so from a large number of inputs raw materials you may get one end item or few end items. Is it okay? So this is essentially a convergent say the process flow. Okay, so this is your representation, and you must cite a few some few examples of products which require this sort of the production system. This plant mainly faces the problem of misallocation of resources. Okay, so this is to be properly understood, misallocation of resources, not misallocation of say the materials primarily. Okay, so that is a typical problem of B plant, but for the A plant the main the problem is the misallocation of resources, and you know what is the definition of a resource. Time buffers are placed at CCRs like you do in the previous case before assembly and before shipping. Is it okay? If you refer to the previous plant, that is the B plant, you will find that the time buffers may not be needed before assembly. Okay, but whereas here for this A plant definitely the time buffer is required at the assembly. Is it okay? So this is your understanding of say the A plant. Next you go to the third variety, the third type of production system. This is referred to as the T plant. So a T plant is schematically presented like this one. That means you have few inputs, these inputs are further processed, you reach at this stage, and then what do you do? That means the multiple say the components or the sub assemblies you form or you produce multiple components only. So this is basically the final component level or the final sub assemblies level. So a group of or a set of components or the process parts along with a set of sub assemblies you form at this stage, you produce at this stage. Next what you do, you go for the different combinations of all these components, different combinations. Okay, and each combination, so how many such combinations you may have? Is it okay? So with different combinations you can say have different types of end items or the final products. Is it okay? So this is, that means with few inputs you can have a large number of end items. So this part is essentially, this more or less for both the inputs. For examples, you follow the same process. That means the number of stages, the processes, number of processes almost remain same. So this is the vertical one, and then you go for diverging. You go for diverging, and that's why it is referred to as the T structure. It is a T structure. That's why this plant is referred to as the T plant. Now, what are the problems it may face? The main the problem it faces, that is the misallocation of material at the final assembly stage. Is it okay? That means you try to have one particular end item, and it needs a set of particular parts and a set of particular sub-assemblies. It may so happen that there could be misallocation of material at the final assembly stage. Okay, so this is one problem you have to deal with. Time buffers are placed before CCRs, like in previous cases, before assembly and before shipping. That means the time buffers are placed before CCRs, before assembly and before shipping, like you do for say like say the A plant. Is it okay? Among the three plants, T plant is designed and operated under assemble to order marketing strategy. I have already mentioned that many such products what you do, that means you take this marketing strategy, that is assemble to order. In the initial lectures we have mentioned, while we are describing several aspects or characteristic features of inventory control systems, that means the inventory control systems which you propose had got a close relationship with specific marketing strategies which you adopt. And one such marketing strategy is assemble to order, and definitely based on the marketing strategy you propose a particular production system. So if your marketing strategy is assemble to order, obviously you refer to say the T plant or this particular production system. Problem of controlling inventory and increasing throughput is common for all three plants, and that's why the TOC approach is to be adopted. TOC is a well accepted technique, a type of stepwise optimization. Okay, so just this is the remark, and definitely now by this time you have come to know that this is a stepwise optimization process. Okay. It uses systems approach for system performance improvement. Is it okay? We are not restricting ourselves to a subsystems performance or optimized subsystem performance. Though it is considered a generic approach suitable for any type of manufacturing systems. Okay, mainly the manufacturing systems are grouped under three categories. At one extreme you have the job shop, and the other extremes you have continuous processing, and in between you have the batch production. So mainly this TOC approach is applicable for batch production, and it is most suitable for job shop also, and repetitive or discrete part manufacturing systems. Okay. So TOC is an application oriented technique based on constant optimization. That means unless you have the actual data, unless you study a particular the manufacturing system, it becomes impossible for you to develop the TOC approach. Though there are the principles you have to follow, all these terms and terminologies you must be able to define, and there are certain rules to be followed. There are certain so the representation logic you must know. So but otherwise it is an application oriented technique. Now, what are the typical questions? Now let me just tell you a few the typical questions related to say the TOC. More or less we have covered all the important aspects of theory of constants, and when we are referring to say the several the types of problems, or say when you try to have say it's a smooth flow of materials within your production systems, and as per the TOC logic, what you need to do, that means you need to propose a DBR scheduling. And we have been using several terms and terminologies which also you find also in other techniques like in MRP, GIT and all. So by this time you have come to know what is an MRP system. We have already discussed the GIT based approaches. To what extent the GIT based approaches are relevant for materials management, to what extent the MRP based approaches are relevant for materials management, and obviously when we discuss TOC, so this TOC approach is also highly relevant for appropriate materials management. So given the context of materials management, how do you compare and contrast MRP, GIT and TOC? Is it okay? So with respect to some materials management only, in the context of materials management only, you need to compare say among these three say approaches, MRP, GIT and TOC. Okay. Mention the steps involved in TOC to achieve global optimization in a plant. As we have been pointing out, that it talks about the system performance. That means at all the steps involved in DBR scheduling or the TOC approach, what you need to do, you need to apply the systems approach. And so we are interested in the systems throughput, we are interested in the systems inventory, and we are interested in the systems operating expense. And obviously when you refer to the financial performance, improvement in financial performance with the application of TOC approach, what we are trying to do, that means we are referring to the financial performance of the entire systems or the entire plant. So that's why the global say the optimization is the most critical issue. An organization, now here is one just a simple example, so we are referring to an organization utilizing TOC logic has a throughput of say rupees say 100,000, an inventory of rupees 50,000 and an operating expense of rupees 40,000. Okay, so we know what what is throughput, what is inventory, what is operating expense. Is it okay? Calculate the net profit, return on investment, inventory turnover and productivity of the organization. Okay, so can you calculate this? So how do you define the net profit? How do you define say the return on investment? How do you define inventory turnover? And how do you define productivity? Is it okay? So throughput divided by say operating expense. Okay, and the return on investment, that also you know. So you just please refer to our previous lecture sessions. I'm sure you will be able to say the answer to these questions. Now the next important or the typical questions you may come across. One typical questions I am just elaborating. One is, a farm produces two products X and Y on 7 resources. What is this resource? You know what is a resource. We have given several examples of resource. So 7 resources, they are identified as A, B, C, D, E, F and G, using 4 raw materials, 4 types of raw materials. That means you just refer to that schematic representation of a production systems, either A type or V type or T type. Operating expenses are rupees 5,000 per week. Operating expense, we know what is an operating expense, and weekly production time is 40 hours, that is 2,400 minutes. From the additional information below, identify the constraint resources. Constraint resources. You know what is the CCR, okay, and what is non-CCR. What is the bottleneck resource? What is non-bottleneck resource? So, what is the relationship between the CCRs and non-CCRs with the bottlenecks and non-bottlenecks? So, if it is a CCR and the bottleneck, obviously it constraint both say the quantity and timing, and this is required and obviously need to consider for the product flow planning. Is it okay? So, so you are aware of all these terms and terminologies, and to what extent they are all interrelated. How many units should be produced? Okay. What is the weekly throughput? You know the definition of throughput. Assume setup times are 0. Okay. So that is our assumption. Many a time setup type may not be 0. It may be non-zero, and this may be substantial. So this way you represent the whole system. That means there are two products X, Y. Weekly market potential, that means demand is 150 units and this is 100 units. Unit selling price rupees 100 and rupees 75 per unit, and these are the processing time per unit. That means there are the 7 resources, or say 7 say work centers or the facilities you have. Each one is considered to be a resource. So against A, the processing time is given, and and this processing time for product A, whereas for product Y, you need resource B, but for product X you don't need resource B. So similarly, resource C is required for product X. Resource D is used for both X and Y. Resource E is used for both product X and product Y, and similarly for resource F. Whereas resource G is used only for product say the Y. Okay, so this information you must have, and then the raw material cost per unit. This is also an important say the data you must refer to. That is, this one is rupees 65, the other, and this is raw materials, the kinds of raw materials you use for product X, and the kind of raw material you use for product Y. So your the raw material cost per unit for product Y is rupees 55. Now this is the typical say the process flow. So this diagram is given, and this is X and this is Y. That means these are the two end items, and you have these are the resources A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Is it okay? All these values are given. That means this is the flow process chart for X and Y. Ultimately, the two end items you get, that is X and Y. Is it okay? And this is your rupees 30 and rupees the 15. Okay, so these values are given. Okay, so now so you have to answer to all these questions. So now so we have actually say the covered this particular topic in 5 sessions, that is theory of constraints, and what we have been pointing out that the theory of constraints, the logic, is highly relevant for materials management purpose. Okay, and what we need to have, like say we have been developing the say the concept first, and then what are the issues involved. The main issue is actually to get a smooth flow of materials within the production systems, which any other systems or any other approaches also they talk about this. If you refer to say GIT based manufacturing systems, So it is also the main objective for the JIT approach, how to get the smooth flow of say the materials within a production systems. So primarily the JIT approach is applicable for repetitive manufacturing systems, and similarly the TOC approach is also primarily applicable for repetitive manufacturing system, discrete part manufacturing systems. Is a complex the systems in dealing with, but TOC is many a time is referred to as DBR scheduling. Now the main advantage of say looking at the TOC approach as a scheduling approach is that you can concretize your the thinking, okay, or the concept of TOC say in a specific manner, and you will be dealing with all the important say the factors, and will be affecting the product flow, affecting the material flow in a system. And our main concern is that the entire scheduling of say the production or the production scheduling approaches must be able to the produce throughput at a particular point in time with the minimum waste. Now when you talk about the TOC, what you can do, that means you are definitely the wastes you need to you will be producing, and as far as possible, okay, when you apply a systematic approach, the step-by-step approach, you must have a control on the waste. And these waste, when you talk about, you refer to the JIT based systems, and when you refer to the JIT based systems, as far as production system is concerned, there are 7 types of wastes. You just refer to our previous lecture sessions, and you just check that to what extent these wastes can be defined as per those norms, and then you try to the fine tune your DBR scheduling in such a way that these wastes which you are going to generate, this must be held at the minimum level. So with this I conclude the sessions, and I hope that the critical issues you should concentrate on. What is the basic concept in TOC, and what are the terms and terminologies, and how do you present say the DBR scheduling. So thank you.